Hello and welcome to episode 74 of A Gamer Looks at 40. I'm Bill Tucker, and we're doing it again. If you walked through the Zelda series with me that ended about a month ago, you might be thinking, really? You're diving into this well one more time? You're pulling from this lake one more time? And I probably should have switched those metaphors, but you know what? They're there. Yeah, I am, because I made a promise. While I was doing the interviews for the N64 games, Ocarina and Majora, I had not played Majora yet. I still had yet to dive into the game. And for some weird reason, I thought I could talk about a game without really playing it, which I quickly learned you can't do. That's not a thing that's possible. So when I talked to my guests, for the most part, they drove the conversation. But there were two people that I said, I need to experience this before I continue an in-depth conversation. One of those people was Helena, aka Hell Hath Fury on TikTok, and of course, my good buddy in Zelda love and fandom and podcasting, Mr. Seth Sturgill of the All In Podcast. Both of these people have intense personal relationships with Majora's Mask, and if you listen to those episodes, you learned a piece of the story. But in this episode, we are going to get the balance of it because for spoiler reasons and other reasons, we couldn't really dive deep. We couldn't get to the end game. We couldn't get to overall themes. We could just get into introductory thoughts. So on this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we are going to have two in-depth conversations with two interesting, fascinating people about their personal relationships with Majora's Mask. And I could have cut this up into little segments and put them into order and created this big hooply-doo, but after attempting that, I realized, let's just present these as is. Let's just put them as conversations and let people enjoy them for the back and forth and discourse that they are. So hopefully you enjoy this episode. Consider this the coda to my Legend of Zelda series, even though I'm sure there will be a Tears of the Kingdom episode at some point in the future. And let's just dive into the wonder, the story, the themes, and frankly, the magic of Majora's Mask. Helena, thank you so much for joining me. Just to kind of set this up a little bit, this episode is thanks to you. This is your episode because when we were talking about Ocarina, we started talking about Majora, and as soon as you found out I had not finished it or was just playing it, you were like, nope. You have to get this game done, and then we'll talk about it. So I have done my homework. I have completed Majora's Mask. I almost 100%ed it. I like 97% of it. Some of those mini games are kind of brutal. And so I would love to just talk about Majora with you for a good half an hour, for whatever. We'll just roll with it. So what I'd love to know first is what's kind of your history with Majora, your first experiences with the game, and we'll just kind of hit the ground running from there.
Excellent. Let me know if my cats are too loud, by the way.
It's fine. It's real life. I've never worried about that.
They're going wild in the background. So as you know, I started with Legend of Zelda. My big brother, 10 years older than me, he was so cool. He had all these like Rob Zombie posters in his bedroom and like black lights and like a lava lamp. So of course, I was obsessed with him. So he played Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and I would just sit on his couch watching him play for hours. And then, he finally let me play, and then they announced that Majora's Mask was coming out. And I still remember the commercial of it was like somebody and all these masks were like coming by them. I think they were putting on the masks. I was losing my mind. I was talking about it nonstop. And then my birthday rolls around. And the thing with Nintendo 64 Majora's Mask is that you needed to have a Rumble Pack to play it. So
right.
My birthday rolls around and I get this, little box wrapped up. And I was like, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
And I unwrap it. It's Donkey Kong 64.
Oh, no.
Devastated.
No.
And I was like, my mom, she knew I was excited for a game. So I was like trying not to cry. And I'm like, she just knew I wanted a game. She didn't know which one though. And so I was so sad. And then my brother reaches behind his back and gives me the real present, which is Majora's Mask. But Donkey Kong came with the Rumble Pack. So,
oh, okay. And I think, are you referring to the expansion pack? The little like module thingy that goes into the, or was it the actual Rumble Pack?
The actual Rumble Pack that you plug into the controller.
Yeah. Okay.
Controller shape.
Yep. Okay, cool. Wow. So he got Majora's Mask, or got Donkey Kong just so you could have a Rumble Pack to play Majora's Mask. Yes. That is sneaky and devious. I kind of love it.
I was so devastated. I can't even tell you how sad I was. I was trying so hard. It was like, my mom's just doing her best. She just doesn't understand technology. It's fine.
And you're trying to be a good person about it. You're like, it's fine. It's okay. Donkey Kong's great. And then you're in your heart of hearts, you're like, I want Majora. But you ended up with both. That's amazing. So what was your first impression when you popped it in and started playing? Because it's quite a shift from Ocarina of Time to this new adventure.
Well, you start in the forest, you're with Epona, and you're walking away, and this takes place like pretty soon after the events of Ocarina of Time end, where you leave Hyrule and you go off into the Kokiri Woods. And so I'm watching him like sadly walk with this horse. And like, it just takes me back to those last moments that I played Ocarina of Time when Navi flew away and I was bawling. So I was like, oh my God, he's looking for Navi in the woods. And just like, like my heart as an 11-year-old could not handle the big feelings I was feeling. It just started so sad, and then Tattle and Tail appear, and I'm like, oh, fairies. And then we have Skull Kid's appearance, and then I was like hooked. As soon as Skull Kid came in with that little mask, I was like, oh, this guy's creepy. I'm ready for him.
That's awesome. I love how the game, it really does start off with this complete disempowerment. Within 10 minutes, you're the hero, you're on Epona, you're rocking. Next thing you know, some kid has completely messed you up. You have nothing. And you're rambling around Clocktown just with nothing. And the best you can do is turn into a Deku scrub, which those masks... This sounds like the Cat's destroyed something.
She really did. Oh my God. I don't even know what.
It's all good. It's okay. So so you walk around Clocktown. The best you can do is turn into this little Deku scrub, which looks like the most painful thing on the planet. Let's be honest. Looks nightmarish putting those masks on. And how'd you feel about that? Because again, you're going from hero to just the kid again. And at 11 years old, I'm wondering if that kind of resonated with you, especially coming from Ocarina.
Oh, no, it absolutely was. I mean, at the time, my only relevant experience was that I was being severely bullied at one school. And it actually got so bad that I told my mom, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to get me out of here and you're not going to like it. And she switched me to a completely new school. So yeah, I can understand starting over somewhere new and just being like, what the hell is this? What do I do? Nobody knows me here. What is this Clocktown,
Well, firstly, I'm so sorry to hear that you had that experience. I'm so sorry to hear that.
It's okay. Yes. It's very funny now.
Yeah, you are a laugh riot. So I guess I could just see that, right? So you're traversing Clocktown, you're getting to know these characters. What was the moment when this game really hit for you? Was it meeting Skull Kid? And as an 11-year-old, did you identify with him at all? Because as we move on through the story of Majora, we learn a lot about who he is, why he is, most importantly. I'm just curious, like, when was the moment that hit you like, this is not Ocarina, and that's a good thing?
Right at the beginning, because every Legend of Zelda game, you have Zelda, Link, and Ganondorf, and they're brought together by fate, and Ganondorf is always the big bad. But we are knocked in the face immediately with Ganondorf was last game, we have someone completely different who, you have Ganondorf, the very serious adult, and then you have Skull Kid, who is just mischievous and chaotic energy. And it was just such a big shift from the personalities. It felt like Skull Kid was more accessible, but still as dangerous, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Mischievous is a great way of putting it. He's mischievous with this unbelievable power.
Yeah.
And I could see any kid doing what he did, right? Not even really knowing the consequences of his actions, which I think is a pretty interesting perspective on Skull Kid. He's very sympathetic, I think, at least.
He really is. And the thing with Ganondorf was that, his thing was to rule and to kill. Skull Kid just with everyone. He did things that were, it wasn't like a direct claim for power. It was just, I am power, and this is how I'm going to mess up your life.
Yeah, I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense. And what I further like about Skull Kid is how he just wanted to be known, right? He just wanted his friends, and especially towards the ending, which I would love to talk to you about because I find the ending of this game absolutely fascinating, but we'll get there. It's he just seems so lonely. And again, as kids, we find ourselves I know I wasn't alone a lot, but when I was alone, it was always a very scary thing. And it was something you wanted to kind of get away from. And I definitely felt that in just this experience of Skull Kid. As a 40-year-old guy, kind of thinking back to, wow, how was it when I was a kid? If I was in this situation, probably would have done the same thing. I would have messed with people, not knowing the consequences to my actions, which a kid doesn't, they just don't.
I completely agree. And the thing is, too, as a child, I could relate, yeah, wow, having all that power, I would totally mess with people too. As an adult, I look back at him and I'm like, no wonder you didn't have friends. Why would anyone want to be friends with you? You little weirdo.
Fair. Yep.
Yeah. it tracks now. But at the time I was like, wow, that's so sad. He's so lonely.
Right. No, yeah, I totally get it. And it's like with my son, my main goal with my son is I don't want him to grow up to be a jerk.
I love that.
Just be nice to people. Like you can go so far in life if you're just nice to people and genuinely nice and kind to people. You don't have to have great grades. You don't have to be super smart. Just be kind to people. And at the end of the day, things will generally work out. Not like no problems or anything, but things will generally work out. Just don't be a jerk. That's. So a big part, of course, Majora also is the 3-day cycle. How did you feel about the 3-day cycle as a kid? And how do you feel about it now? Has that changed at all?
So the first time I played, right, my sister, who's a year older than me, is sitting right by me, and I'm, going through it. And as you know, you can't save until a certain point. You have to do a few things before you're able to unlock that owl and save your progress. I did not get to that point, but my sister was like, I want to play. So my mom made me give up the controller, and I didn't get to save any of my progress. So
no.
I was already the first time I played, I was like that was so unfair. But when I actually, she had her turn and it was the next day I got to play again, then I was delighted. I know a lot of people don't like the 3-day program. And I mean, there's obviously cons to it, but I love it. It's so unique. I mean, you have Groundhog Day, but with special powers.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And I had the same reaction. I first time I played this was probably maybe over a decade ago. One of those, hey, I need to scratch Majora off the list. And once I found out there was that 3-day timeline and then kind of loops and starts over, I immediately checked out. I'm like, I don't love these mechanics. I'm not a fan of redoing things over and over again. And this time around, I leaned into it. And I'll be honest, I had a guide helping, which definitely shaved some of that friction off. Again, I'm going to take a dad W on that and just be like, dad win. I don't have all day to do this. But I try to avoid spoilers as much as humanly possible. I really want to experience the experience, really experience the game as it was presented without the friction. But as I was experiencing that 3-day loop, the themes of it just started pelting me like boosh, boosh. I think the themes of it are so beautiful in the concept of, and stop me if you feel I'm off base, is you can't get everything figured out in one cycle. You can't do everything. So make it count. All right. Is that kind of something like in line with that?
That's absolutely accurate. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's completely true. And like some of the quests you do, I'm thinking of the couples mask, which did you do the couples mask quest?
Absolutely. Anja and Coffee, is that right? I think that's right.
I call them Anju and Cafe.
Okay. Oh, Cafe. I think you're right. I think it is Cafe. Language is fluid. I'm not worried about it.
I did watch a video earlier where someone was all Kaife, and I was like, well, no. That's definitely wrong. Yeah, exactly. Let's calm down. It's not too fancy. But the couples mask quest, you had to do everything right. And if you messed up anything, start over. And there are so many outcomes if you branch off and do something different, like between each iteration of it. So it's crazy that there's this linear path, but you can literally see like the choices that I make create these different outcomes, which is very much like life, but we don't get to replay life at all. So it's
right.
That quest was awful in that I failed it so many times, and like right at the end when you had Cafe and Link opening the doors for each other, that's always where I messed up, which is you make it there and oh my god. And if you think about it too, because Cafe gets trapped in there if you don't get the mask.
Yeah, good point. You're right.
So he would have just died.
Withered away. Wow. Yeah, very good point. Wow, you're right. I didn't even think that he would have been trapped in there if you don't succeed. I mean, until the 3-day cycle comes through and the moon descends. But I mean, but you're right though. There is a finality to that. I didn't even think about that.
And then you think about Link being like, I messed this up and my friend is gonna die, and scrambling to reset the 3-day timer. I mean, we don't get that much of a glimpse of Link's internal process, but thinking about that now, like, he would just be in a state of devastation all the time.
Yeah. I can't imagine, with that 3-day cycle, everything you do within that cycle. And this really knocked me for a loop when I found out about it, even after defeating a dungeon. My first thought was, well, when the timer kicks over again, do I have to do that again? Mm-hmm. The answer is yeah. Yeah, you do. And it struck me like, wow, I don't have to do this again. But all that work I did to clean up the swamp or make spring appear again on the mountaintop, that's all gone. Mm-hmm. I've reset things and they're right back to where they were. And that is such I don't know, you can choose to think of it as very sad or also choose to think of it as kind of hopeful, right? And I'm still on the fence as to which one I land on with that.
I'm definitely in the very sad camp, because if you think about it, I mean, we finish with the Icana Tower dungeon. So if we think about it, all anyone knows is that Link finished up the tower. All the other places that you've already fixed, they're not fixed. So you can never have fixed everything for everyone. At the end, people are disappointed.
Right. And that is extremely sad. But I think the hopeful side of it is too, or maybe not hopeful, that might not be the best word. I think it speaks to doing the best you can with the cycle you have. Right?
Yes. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good interpretation.
And that's I think that's kind of again where I land on it. But you're right, it is extremely sad. I said it all through the episode, but the one quest that really got me, and I don't know why. Maybe the chickens are cute. The chickens are adorable. They're so cute. The guy who has the chickens, who's lamenting, and not just lamenting, but resigned to the fact that he's never going to see his chickens grow up, and his chicks come up to chickens. And I don't know why that made me so sad, it's really heartbreaking, and it's not that he's just resigned. He's just kind of, yeah, this moon's gonna land on us, and when you have that moment where you can grow the chickens up, with the chicken mask, it's so cute. But then you realize that we're gonna reset this thing with the song of time and right back to where you were, square one. So is it worth it to give somebody in a different timeline one moment of peace? Anja and Cafe, they get one shot, right? But you have to restart it or else the world ends. It's all of that, all those themes are just so strong in an N64 game in the Zelda series. It's baffling to me.
They really are. And so, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of this theory by now that this game is the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, hopelessness, and acceptance. So if you think about each different character and where they're at on that spectrum, we've got the chicken guy who is definitely in acceptance. But I think that's very interesting when we think about our own mortality, and especially people who are terminal, which for a moment, let's talk about this. This is my big brain moment. Termina would be terminal if it had an L at the end. Who has L as their first letter? Link.
What?
Terminal. Everyone's terminal there. So
yikes! You're right. It is a state of terminal. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you think about when I think about the chicken guy, I think about parents who might have cancer and they're having to accept that they'll never see their children grow up. And I think that when you start kind of letting that in, like, oh, ow, oh God, okay, I might face this one day. It's hard to grasp it. It's just the game is so beautiful, and it's just so different from the other Legend of Zelda games.
Absolutely. And I love that it dares to go that route.
Yeah.
Right. That's a daring thing to do. And remember, this game came out, was it maybe a year and change after Ocarina? Like there was not a
2 years.
2 years, right? There was not a big turnaround time for a game that is full of these themes and this really interesting emotional center to it. I mean, again, the 3-day cycle is so crucial to this whole game. And again, there's so many themes that come up. Yeah, and you're right. It does bring up real world stuff, right? Would you restart the timer if you could? What would you do differently? What would the outcomes of those things be different? And I have to say that Anja and Cafe, I know people had said to me, got to play at least up until that couple's mask quest, because that is like a heartbreaker. And sure enough, if you don't have a tear after that, I don't know. Maybe you're not paying. I don't know. That was very, very touching for me. Was there a quest for you that really touched you? Obviously, Anja and Cafe are one of those. Is there another one that maybe hit you hard, or one that you just like? You're just like, I thought that was just fun, even in a silly way, because there's some silly stuff in this game as well.
The hand in the toilet.
Hand in the toilet's so good.
It really is. And do you know the story behind it?
I don't know the story behind it.
So there's a Japanese horror story that when you are sitting on a toilet, a hand grabs you from underneath.
I don't know if I love this, but I want to know more.
I mean, that's the story as far as I looked into it. But as a child, I actually, before I even played this game, I had that fear. So I'm just saying, I came up with it first. Before I even knew this was a fear, that was a fear to me. But I thought it was just so funny, the reaching up for the toilet paper. Just such a human moment.
Yeah, I love that. And that was one of the moments early on where I kind of stopped and said, what am I into here? What am I getting into? What is happening? I'm a big fan of, I have to look it up now, that the name, The guy who's just dancing and wants you to pass on his dance to other
Oh my
people.
God. Yes, I love him. That quest was so funny.
It's so good. And you go to I think there's like 2 or 3 people who are trying to dance and you just share his dance. And when you wear the mask, it's just his little head coming out of your forehead. Again, so weird and interesting. So bizarre, but great. I love it.
Majora's Mask is just such a bizarre game. It just doesn't follow what other Legend of Zelda games do. It's just totally its own thing.
Absolutely. Were there any other quests that kind of that remind you kind of like that, either again really touching or really impactful?
I mean, it's the main storyline. Lulu and her eggs, and Mikau and their relationship. How he just went to go get the eggs back from the pirates and then was killed. I mean, he's the only one of the people that you turn into that you see die.
Yeah.
The other one's already dead. So that was, I've always, as you know, I've always loved Zoras. They've had a very special piece of my heart. So that was crazy for me. And then seeing, my new Princess Ruto incarnate, all depressed and sad and like looking out over the water, waiting for her eggs and not able to speak. Yeah.
That's tough. A lot of those quests, especially that one with again, they're the Zora, correct? That's the Zora. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah. So with the Zora, I love that little quest where you're trying to get the band together to put together one final song. I love that concept of getting the band together for that one final song. And you're right. I do remember the eggs as well. I remember that being really challenging too. That's a tough sequence to get through, to get all those eggs together. But the idea of a singer who refuses or is too, I'll just say, depressed to sing is a very sad thought and a sad idea. But again, very impactful.
Yeah, a mother having lost all of her babies. I mean,
That'll do it.
And then her man. That's a whole lot of tragedy in a very short amount of time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Another character that I always find it terrifying in a very good way is the Happy Mask salesman.
I love him.
He is so bizarre. And when I was first playing it, I played it on an emulator. I thought it was broken because he's a series of jump cuts. Like he'll be looking at you, and then it's a jump cut to another, like a horror movie, like something literally out of a horror movie. And what's your take on the Happy Mask salesman? Because there are tons of theories as to who this person is, what they're about. What's your take on Happy Mask salesman?
I can't say that I have a take on him. To be honest, I just kind of accept him as he is, which is a weird little dude. I mean, I feel like at night, if you were living in Termina and you heard something, you would turn on your light and just see him skittering across the ceiling.
Yeah.
Just an absolute horror show. And I think, for me, it doesn't have to go any deeper than that. I'm like, all right, dang.
So you're choosing to take him on like face value, kind of just.
I really do, yeah.
Almost like the keeper of the masks, almost, and because he's the one who wants Majora's Mask, and he's basically telling you like, you got to get this thing back because if you don't, we're doomed. Like, so I think that's interesting, but you're kind of just taking it on that face value. He's the keeper of the masks. He kind of knows what's up.
I mean, if we got into it, he's kind of like the shepherd guiding you through death. He's asking you to collect things for him, to collect souls for him when
basically.
He gets these other masks.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at some fan theories right now because I know you love yourself some fan theories and some lore.
Do.
I know you do. So I try to come prepared. There's a series of theories I'm looking at right now about the Happy Mask salesman. The first one is that he may be an ancient one or a descendant of the ancient ones. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he might be a descendant. Another theory says he may be a deity with mystical powers, and because he has a lot of knowledge, it could be a deity or an earthly avatar of one. Interesting. Another theory states it could be a Sheikah, which I don't know if I buy that so much. I can read it real quick. Due to the fact that his eyes are, for the most part, closed, it's hard to determine the color of his eyes. However, when he opens them during one of his violent outbursts, oh boy, are they violent, they're red. Red eyes are a characteristic commonly connected to the Sheikah. Oh.
I can vibe with that one. And he also teaches you the Song of Healing.
This is true.
Yeah. What else? He teaches you other songs too. What other songs does he teach you?
Other songs? I'm not quite sure. Additionally, in Ocarina of Time, the Happy Mask Salesman gives Link the Mask of Truth as a reward for selling masks. And it's a well-known artifact of the Sheikah race.
Huh.
Ooh. See? Fascinating.
You know, I vibe with that one for sure.
You're digging Sheikah? Okay. And then a final one, which is very silly, is Shigeru Miyamoto, because they believe that the Happy Mask Salesman is an in-game avatar of Shigeru Miyamoto. Compounded because on his back he has like a Mario mask and like different characters on his back, which I just think are Nintendo, shout outs. I don't think that is intended to be a Miyamoto, but I thought that was cute and clever nonetheless.
I'm playing my first D&D campaign. I've been told that every time you play it for the first time, you have like a stand-in character for you.
Okay.
So I would find that very cute if he had a little stand-in character for him.
Yeah, that would be kind of
that one.
Right? Kind of again, an unhinged masked salesman is be an interesting choice for sure. I remember the one situation, and I'm gonna need help remembering it. Mm-hmm. Are there Gibdos, the little mummy zombie dudes?
Yes, there's Gibdos and then there's Garos, and the Garos are the ones that you fight and they don't leave a body behind.
Right. Okay. And because there's that one where there's a house in the middle of that kind of desert rocky region, and there's the little girl whose dad is slowly turning into a Gibdo. Ikana
Canyon, and it's Pamela and her dad. And her dad is a researcher and got cursed somehow.
That jump scare of him leaping from the closet, I yelped. I audibly yelped. And I'm not as used to jump scares as you are, being you do that a lot on your TikTok with the creepy pastas and the reactions. However, I thought of you. I was like, oh, Helena probably loved this one.
I did. I loved it so much.
Totally. That one's heartbreaking too, though. That is so sad and scary.
A child whose only parent is falling apart and literally can't take care of them. So the child has to take care of the parent.
The parent has to lock himself into a closet for fear of harming his child. Like that's
deep.
That's ridiculous. Deep. That's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
It is. And yes, you are right. I loved that part. I remember vaguely, I think my heart rate raised quite a bit when I saw that.
Ooh. And then you have to fight him, and you don't have to fight him. You play the Song of Healing.
Uh-huh.
The Song of Healing itself too is again one of those sad, tragic things. But I believe with the Song of Healing, and correct me if I'm wrong, you basically see either it's the last moments of that person, or I believe it's what they want. I forget exactly what it's. The representation of the Song of Healing. I should see this and know this, but I don't.
Yes. So if you use it on tormented individuals, it yields a mask. So you definitely see people's last moments or, getting a new start. But it really depends on how far gone they are. I mean, tormented souls, especially like the Goron and the Zora. But you don't even get the mask from the Deku. So that makes me wonder how did Skull Kid create a mask out of him?
That's a really good question. You're right, because all those masks are basically like the embodiment of the character they came from. Mm-hmm. How would Skull Kid have a Deku mask? That's a very interesting question.
Or I guess we don't really see him put a mask on Link. He just turns him into a Skull Kid, and then you play the Song of Healing, and the mask falls off. So I guess this does actually track.
It tracks. Fair.
Yeah, that tracks. But still, I find it interesting that the Deku mask looks like the butler's son, and that part was also devastating.
Brutal. Absolutely
brutal.
Not fun at all. Well, fun, but not in a. And that's what's weird about this game too. It's fun. Like I'm having a great time. Speaking of fun, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about my new favorite character in the entire Zelda franchise, and that's my man Tingle.
Tingle.
I am a Tingle fan. I love Tingle. Why did we hate him so much when it was 2001 or whatever this game was? I remember in the video game magazines everywhere, worst character of the year, Tingle. I'd like to think we're a little more tolerant of people, what who they choose to be. I wish I could be as free as Tingle. Just
I've
doing
always
his
loved
thing.
Tingle. I've never had an issue with him. I was just like, man, this middle-aged man is having a crisis and he just wants to be a fairy. Hell yeah, go off, queen. Like,
right? I mean, I love that. He just wants to float in his balloon, and then he has his made-up Tingle dance. This is the magic spell I made up. I love that. This is my magic spell that I made up. Oh, the magic words that I made up. Cool. That's fantastic.
Sprinkles. That's so cute.
And he has confetti on hand for any situation. I love Tingle. I just find him so free and entertaining, and there's an interesting moment too when you go into the swamp, and I think it's the visitor center, and you talk to the guy who's at the visitor center checking your pictographs.
Yes.
And if you show him a pictograph of Tingle, it turns out that's his brother. And he's like, if you see him next time, could you tell him to come home? And he almost seems embarrassed by him. And that kind of bummed me out. Like, don't be embarrassed of your brother Tingle. He's living his best life. I love it. I absolutely love it.
But doesn't that track though? There's always one black sheep of the family that everyone's like, oh God, fucking Tingle again. Jesus.
Now, we don't know the situation. Tingle may be a problem at home, but as far as I know, he's delightful. I was just looking at another fan theory, and I want to see how you feel about this. A common fan theory is that Link is actually dead throughout the entire game. You're nodding your head.
Yep.
You dig this? You dig
100%.
Really?
Pretty sure I wrote that theory. No, but I am so on board with that. I think that, okay, so we know that non-Kakarikans cannot go into the Kokiri forest because they turn into, is it Skullfos? It is Skullfos, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, Stalfos or Skullfos, yeah.
Stalfos, thank you.
Stalfos.
Yeah, they turn into Stalfos. I think that we know that Link is Hylian, and after Navi leaves him, there's nothing making him a Kokiri. So I believe that he goes off into the woods to die because he cannot handle that he lived through these atrocities going back and forth from being, an adult and a child, and literally no one knows what he did. He has to live with everything that he saw and did, and nobody will ever understand him.
Wow. That's really intense. I never caught the idea of him not being, I'm going to say or pronounce wrong, Kokirikan, is that right?
A Kokiri.
Kokirian.
Yeah.
Kokirian? Okay. I never thought about that because I guess the fairy is kind of not defined, but maybe that's like a sign. That's what Tingle wants. Tingle's overjoyed that you have a fairy. He's like, oh, I wish I had a fairy. That's awesome. Will you be my friend? I got a map for sale. That's interesting. Huh. I read that and I was like, oh, I don't know if I kind of like that because I think it kind of dilutes some of the themes, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I fully 100%. I think that his journey through Termina is him coming to terms with his own death.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting thing. And I think if you go that route, I don't think it changes a lot in the game because obviously you're still dealing with all these little short stories. And which is why I love about this game so much. It's these little short stories, but I think the temperature changes a bit. That's really interesting. Really cool. I'd like to now fast forward a bit to the moon and to kind of the ending of this game where you have your masks. You've taken down the four, you have the four, I guess, giants, right? I think referred to as giants. They're now ready to stop the moon. They literally stop the moon from falling, which is so cool. You get inhaled into the moon, right? Because now the mask is like, I'm done with Skull Kid. Into the moon it goes, and you're presented with this like lush green field What's your take on it? And also, how did you feel when you arrived there? Like, I know how I felt as a 42-year-old man. But how did you feel when you first explore that area and you get to that moment where it's this peaceful green area?
I felt so uneasy because so in my personal life, my grandma had just died of cancer, and I remember visiting her the last night that she was alive, and the hospital was so white and clean and sterile, and it made me so uncomfortable having all of this sadness, but being in this extremely sterile environment. So in Majora's Mask, there's all of this chaos, and then suddenly you're in this white, bright, clean place. And I was like, oh, he's dead. He's dead now. He's definitely dead now.
Right.
This is heaven, and he's dead now. So it was really hard for me to grapple with that change of scenery. It made me like extremely uncomfortable.
So how did it feel navigating it? Because as you go through that area, you kind of made a grimace there. Like as you navigate the area, you have, the Majora Mask or Skullboy sitting in the middle, lonely by the tree, and there's all the other kids walking around. Wow, yeah, I can imagine connecting those two dots and that being a really unsettling place to be.
It was very surreal.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
you play video games to kind of escape real life. And I was like, oh, you are inserting me into a terrible memory I have. And so I was a little like kind of miffed about it, to be honest.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. It was a space you obviously didn't want to be in.
I didn't. And then
Yeah.
as soon as I was able to go like into the dungeons where, you can put on the masks and go through the trials, that felt better to me. But still, even like thinking about it as an adult, I'm like, oh, that was my least favorite part of the game. I did not like that.
It gives you a chill, I think. For me, when I looked at it, I didn't have a connection to it in that way, but it just seems so strange and peaceful. And I love how the game just basically stops. You can roam around that whole space as much as you like. You can spend all day in this kind of in between. I don't call it a limbo or like a purgatory almost. I think that'd be a little too much, but like in this kind of like liminal space, if that makes sense, where you can just spend time there. And time is essentially stopped because the moon is stopped. The giants are holding it. They're doing their best. And you're just in this really calm, serene space. And I think it really speaks to Skull Kid and kind of where he would like to be is kind of how I like this is who he is. But wow, yeah, your experience seemed super personal. Yeah, wow, I can't imagine having that come to mind like that.
This game, I mean, this is my favorite game for a reason. I think that it arrived to me at the time that I needed it.
Sure.
Yes, and as an adult, I have so much appreciation for that. And now that I'm an adult with the internet, like, wow, I'm gonna get into all these fan theories.
I love that. I love the fan theories. And at the very end, you obviously you have to surrender the masks to the different kids that are in that liminal space. Do you remember? And if you don't, that's fine. I just found this interesting in my playthrough. Do you remember which mask you got rid of last? Which was the one do you remember which one you wanted to hold on to the most? I do, because this was about a month or so ago, but I guess that's a sideways question of asking like which mask did you feel like you had the most either connection or utility for?
So the couples mask, I had spent so much time getting that damn mask that I was like, you can pull this out of my dead fingers. But if it were just utility, it would be the bunny hood.
Oh yeah. For me, when I was doing my playthrough, I didn't know if I needed anything. I'm like, okay, I know I had to get all the masks. I got all the masks. I'm sure there's a reason for it, and the game is asking me to surrender them. So I'm sure something good is going to happen if I do. But the bunny hood was the last one, and I think couples mask was like third from last. I did not want to give those up because bunny hood in a game that's all about beating the clock, the thing that helps you beat the clock the most practical way is easily for utility. Because again, I didn't know if I needed it or not.
I completely. I also had a hard time giving up the all night mask because I thought it was just so cool looking. It was my favorite aesthetically.
Oh, it's so cool. And a lot of these masks really are unitaskers. They're really designed for just one thing. But I do think there's also the stories connected to them. Like the postman's hat I never used, but I love the postman's story. That the postman's story is so touching and striking. So we're kind of wrapping up our Majora conversation. And thank you again, Helena, for not only taking the time, but for also being transparent and honest in your appreciation and your experiences. Some of that stuff's not easy. So thank you. But if you had to kind of put a coda on it, like final thoughts, Majora's Mask, personal experience, looking back on it, yeah, what would be your kind of like your final thought wrap up on the game and kind of your journey with it?
So I have an anecdote for this.
Go for it.
So I have this new kitten, right? And I have all of my N64 games on a bookshelf. She knocked my Majora's Mask cartridge off of the shelf and it shattered. And the sadness that I've felt since then, it's been awful. I collected all the pieces, but there's no way to put it back together. I'm even tearing up talking about this.
Oh no.
So it's kind of like this, I feel like it kind of relates to the game in some way where you just get the bad outcome at the end and you can't go back and fix it. I'm just like, if I had just kept it on a lower shelf, it wouldn't have shattered. So, for me, it's a little bittersweet at the moment. I'm a little raw about it, but
fair. Yeah, totally. I get it.
Yeah. It's just such a meaningful game to me, and it has done so much for me as a person. It's really really impacted a lot of things in my life. I mean, historically speaking, like what I went through, and even personality wise, it's given me a little bit more appreciation for the grief process and just understanding of, consequences and actions.
Sure.
It's a good game. It's my favorite. It'll always be my favorite.
Helena, I don't know if you're going to be listening to this or not. Maybe you'll catch the show, maybe you won't. But if you're hearing this, please know that after that conversation, I'm on a mini mission. I really want to get you another copy of Majora's Mask. Because based on what we talked about and what you shared, I think it's more than just a game. I think having that in your possession is a part of you. And I would love to make that happen. I've already been on eBay. I've looked through some listings. Things are kind of crazy as far as pricing goes. I don't know if these things are actually legitimate. It's a weird world for me, but please know that I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to keep my eyes open. And if I can make that happen for you, please know that it's going to be mostly thanks to the funding from my wonderful patrons. But again, I really want to, I just want to make that happen for you because it sounds like this is something that you really do need in your orbit. So, and if I can make it happen, like I said, this will be thanks to my wonderful patrons who I'd love to shout out. Once again, as always, Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, Games with Coffee, Patrice Millette, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sturgill, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of the Gamers Week podcast, and finally, the one and only Pete Harney. And if you would like to join these fine people, please sign up at patreon.com/gamerlooks of40. Check out the tiers, and we hope to have you on board soon. Now, next up is a person who you have heard multiple times on this show, especially if you've been following the Zelda podcast, Seth Sturgill of the All In podcast. And I love the fact that he was so brave and honest and open about his experiences with Majora's Mask and Zelda as a whole. I had to have him on for this final coda. And yes, this turns this episode into a long, over 90-minute epic, but our conversation goes places that are unexpected and really dives deep into why this game is so special to him and so personal. So hopefully you don't mind the repeated questions. Hopefully you don't mind some of my repeated thoughts, but I wanted to present this as is, whole, kind of uncut. So please enjoy Seth Sturgill and I as we talk about the magic and the impact of Majora's Mask. I do have to say I am so glad I saw this one to the end. I am really glad I stuck through it. I'm glad I had assistance through a guide. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it allowed me to enjoy it as opposed to really like have that much friction. But there's so much richness to this game. So I think the first thing we'll start off with are the side quests, which we've discussed is really kind of the heart and soul of this game, are those little side stories.
Certainly.
And the first one I just want to talk about because it's the most celebrated, I think, of the game is Anju and Kafi. Am I going to say that right?
Yeah, I always say cafe, but
Cafe.
whatever. It's, yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Language
sure.
is fluid. Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's I thought everyone's been talking about that, like mentioning, oh, wait till you get to this. And sometimes it gets a little overblown. But wow, that emotionally delivers unlike probably anything I've experienced in the Zelda series. And I've spent the last 7 months doing nothing but Zelda, I think. What was your when you first played this game and experienced that whole literally a 3-day full cycle quest? Do you remember how you felt the first time? And when you think back to it on subsequent playthroughs, kind of where are you now?
It's interesting. And I talked about this the first time we talked about Majora's Mask, just sort of my circuitous relationship with it, how when the game first came out and I played it as a kid, I really didn't like the game whatsoever. And so I don't think I even did this at all when I first played the game as a kid.
Oh, wow.
So I don't think it was until the 3DS version came out when I really sort of fell head over heels in love with this game that I did this for the first time. And just as you were kind of saying, like with a guide, kind of there and playing it that way, and just being so swept up in all of these characters, all of the themes, and like this, I think the reason that this side quest stands out so much for everybody who plays this game is because of how much you have to put up to make it happen. The world-ending importance that you have to place on just making sure that these two sort of star-crossed lovers wind up going through with their marriage, and literally all the way up to the very final moments of the day. It's breathtaking. It's so beautiful. And it's this quiet, personal little love story that requires so much work on your part. And you have to spend that entire cycle just helping them. Everything else, forget about it. You're just focused on them for a cycle. And, that kind of notion that you're left at the end of it when the cycle ends and inevitably has to repeat. It's like, okay, like that happened and I did it. And now we're starting over again. And when that cycle repeats, they're right back to where they were. But in that cycle, you helped them.
And we've explored that theme a lot in our previous conversations, where it is so stunning, the idea that you go through that entire process, and you can easily mess it up. I mean, you could be on day 2 in the evening, miss a conversation, and that's it. And how precarious that love is. And even though it's so strong, it kind of there's a lot of things that kind of went through my mind as I was experiencing it. And one of the big ones was how so many things have to happen in the right order to make something beautiful happen. Yeah. I think, a lot of people will sometimes say, hey, would you want to go back in time and do something over? My answer is usually no, because I don't know what the ripple effect that's going to be. If I have a regret in my life that I've done something wrong or took a wrong turn, if I take another turn, who knows what's going to happen because of that, right? Do I meet my wife? Do I have my kids? All that stuff. And the fact that you have to almost kind of orchestrate this union in so many different little ways is really, really breathtaking. And it also speaks a lot to me about not the fragility of love, but again, it's more about how things have to kind of come together when they do beautiful things happen. It's a lot of these little events, right?
Right. And the nature of just fate in general. And like, you know, I mean, Bill, you think about like the little things that had to happen in both of our lives to even equal up to you and I having this conversation right now.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, yeah. All of the little things that had to go exactly right. And this game allows you to be the author of those events, you know, to be the one that makes that happen for them. And when you have literally this like impending doom and like the notion of like, I have to put everything else aside to make sure that these things happen exactly perfectly, that everything falls exactly in place. And like the fact that it is hard and like it's incredibly inconvenient, you know, to make these things happen. Like it's difficult and like it's obtuse, and I can only imagine trying to do this thing without a guide.
I mean, imagine that, like having to do all these little things and get to the right places at the right time and just wait. And yeah, I think it definitely speaks to that. I also love the fact that it's, like you mentioned, they are okay with going through this and spending what precious time they have left together, which could be, it's so beautiful. Like it's so beautiful to think, hey, what would I want to do in my last moments? And their decision is, we're not gonna face the afterlife or whatever is after this life. When this moon inevitably descends and destroys us, we are going to spend those last moments. That's a choice we've made, is to just kind of sit in this small room together and wait it out. Is so sad. Yeah. I challenge anybody to watch this and not get like a small tear or feel a little something, because it's such a beautiful notion.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, just like this, even just like you mentioned them being in that kind of like small room, I think is so important. It's not as if you help them throw this like grandiose wedding that the entirety of Clocktown. It's just you and them, you know, ultimately, and you're just in this kind of like small, intimate, you know, room. And yeah, for them, it's like, look, we're not going to waste a second. You know, we know that there is a ticking clock throughout the entire heart of this game, this thread that runs, you know, throughout the entirety of it. But they're like, I am not wasting a second of what's ticking down on that clock. We're going to be together the entire time, no matter what. And it's gorgeous. This is and this is in a Zelda game that released like 20 plus years ago.
I know. It's crazy. And again, I love that idea of using time well. And again, we talked about a bit too during our first conversation about what do you do with your cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that this is one of the more pure expressions of that in, you know, them spending those last moments. I also find it really interesting. There's a lot of acceptance in this story as well, because if I remember correctly, and again, this is about a month ago, and I wish we had done this a little sooner, but that's just me and all my stuff going on. But Cafe he looks like a child. Like, yeah, he's a boy. And I think when Anju sees him, I don't remember she's taken aback, like, oh, you're a child, but that's okay. I don't care. We still have this connection. You have the mask, I have the mask, and we're coming together to create the couple's mask. I felt a lot of acceptance there. And I'm excited for who you are, and it doesn't matter what you look like or where you're at. We have this connection that goes beyond that. And I that was very touching for me as well.
Yeah, I think he's like, he gets cursed by Skull Kid or something.
That's what
like
it is. Yeah, he gets cursed. Right. Yes, he does. Yes.
Yeah. And what's interesting is it's almost like the invert. And I don't know, like, hopefully we can chat about just Skull Kid as a character, because I really like how Skull Kid as a character is just sort of like this child that's basically just like lashing out. And you know, and is just sort of like lonely and lashing out in all these different directions. And Cafe is just sort of like in the crosshairs of that. And he's trapped in this kind of like child's body. And it's almost like when she sees him, it's like maybe she's taken aback or whatever, but it's like, who cares? Like, we don't have the time to waste on getting hung up on the details of this, you know?
Right.
So
no, exactly right. No, it's really, again, really, really a very special moment. It really is. And again, one of those, I'm glad I spent the couple hours it takes to go through it. Again, even with the guide to kind of show you when to get there and where, you still have to, get some stuff done. You have to go through that section where, you're pushing the blocks and you and Cafe are kind of working together which is a really cool design idea, just a gameplay idea, working together to get through that section where you're trying to get it's one of the masks. I forget which you need to, which one of them you have to get, but regardless, it's a really, really cool thing. You mentioned Skull Kid. Skull Kid is such an interesting, I don't even want to say antagonist because it's hard to say. Majora's Mask is the antagonist.
Right.
I mean, that's the force driving things. Skull Kid just gets caught up in this. And like you said, at the very end, you have that turn. Even early on in the game, there's that moment where you kind of get a little backstory on him and how the fairies and him met up, and you get a little bit of that backstory. How does Skull Kid resonate for you?
Skull Kid is this, because Majora's Mask itself is certainly the antagonist. There's an actual presence and like antagonistic force within Majora's Mask, but it's also just the villain of this game is also just kind of loneliness. It's sort of Skull Kid's, he's this lonely kid that's lost in the woods. And we already have that little built-in piece of lore. What's really cool, this being a sequel to Ocarina of Time, you always hear, like, even when you're a kid in Ocarina of Time, you hear, like, oh, like, what happens to the kids that get lost in the Lost Woods, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And Skull Kid is what happens.
Wow, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. Skull Kid is what happens to those kids who get lost in the woods. And he has his fairies with him still, and they have stuck by his side. But like, what happens when those fairies leave? What happens when all of a sudden he gets tempted by this mask that can offer him power and a little bit of control in his station in life for the first time, and he bumps into the literal hero of time, that has all of this power. And he really is just this lonely kid who sees the opportunity to seize control and takes it. And you kind of can't blame him for doing it.
Sure.
You kind of can't blame him for wanting to upset the establishment a little bit, for wanting to, I really relate to that character because when I was a kid, and I think this is something that maybe a lot of people felt like when they were a kid, just this lack of control, just feeling like you were being pulled along by your parents, by school, by, church or whatever it is, not feeling like you have any sense of control, feeling like you're just this kid in the Lost Woods, waiting for life to happen to you, not by you,
Yep.
And Skull Kid saw the opportunity to make life happen by him, and he took it. And I think that's intensely relatable. And, I think I said this on a previous episode of this show, but for me, the biggest takeaway that I have from Zelda just as a series, and one of the things that I just love so much about this franchise in general, is the kind of, I guess, meta narrative or theming of childhood. And that probably comes from me. That a lot of that kind of comes from me and my personal journey with this franchise. The way that it's the first video game, my first memory of this life is playing the original Legend of Zelda. And so I relate this series to my childhood, but it comes up again and again and again in the franchise. This notion of being a kid, and Skull Kid, I think, and even just the fact that the character is even just called Skull Kid, didn't have a name.
Right. You're right. Right. He's just Skull Kid. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I relate to that a lot.
No, and I think that those are all really good points. And I do love the fact, because I see a lot of, I have a son who's 6 and he's almost gonna be 7 in a few months. And I see a lot of Skull Kid in him. I had to pick him up today. He didn't want to go. He gets lashed out. He gets angry. He gets frustrated. And I know it's because it's exactly like you said, he doesn't have a choice. Like, he has to get in the car. Like, he has to go home and do homework. And we try to give him choices, but at the end of the day, the choices we give are really for us in the end of the day. Hey, do you want to do your homework now or in 5 minutes? It's like, well, at the end of the day, you still have to get this thing done. We're just going to give you some leeway. But I can totally see him wanting to have that control. And that's why I think kids love games, not just like video games, but any sort of play, because they have full control of whatever they're experiencing. They have that, they can seize onto that and use imaginations. And yeah, I can see any kid. I can see myself. You get this mask of unlimited power. You're gonna lash out, and you're gonna make mistakes. And right, and it's almost to the point where, can you actually, like you said, blame a child who stumbled across this incredible power? Yeah, can you blame him? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We all would have done that in his situation and at that age. Absolutely. And, I think it's really beautiful too, the way that, the structure of most Zelda games is you're going to these dungeons, you're getting the item, you're getting the treasure, you're saving the world, blah, blah, blah. And that's certainly true here too, but the framing of it is so different in Majora's Mask. Ultimately, what you're doing is not just stopping the moon, not just killing the big antagonistic evil Majora's Mask entity, but you're reuniting him with his friends. Like at the end of the day, that's what the goal is to reunite Skull Kid with his 4 friends that he felt abandoned by. And like, I just think that moment when you kind of go into that liminal space where Skull Kid is just sitting under the tree, it's like, it's beautiful, It's such a touching moment. And that all just really, really resonates with me, and the way that they kind of come back for him. And
and that's exactly. Now, remind me with that, is that the Skull Kid knows the giants. Is that accurate? Right. Okay. And that was the giants kind of coming back. So I would love to talk about the giants first, giants as well. And we'll talk about actually the moon and maybe even that final encounter, which I don't know. Talk about creepy and scary. Those final forms of Majora that's nightmare fuel, some of that stuff. But in a game that has quite a bit of it. I do also want to say, when it comes to Skull Kid, kids are the centers of their own universe. And that's just how they are. That's because kids have to be taught that there's a world around them they need to be aware of. So, and that's, I think, you ask any parent, they probably would agree. Kids are naturally self-centered because that's their world. It's themselves and their stuff, right? You have to, again, teach a child that there's things outside of you that you need to be considerate of. And with Skull Kid, again, like, what else would you expect him to do? Right? He's the center of his own universe. So he's going to use this power to make himself feel good, to lash out in unfortunately terrible ways. And I like to think at the end of this, he comes away with what he wanted at the end all along, was friendship, and some friendship and just a closeness, at least.
I think that's all he wanted ultimately.
Yeah, at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Just have his friends back. And like there's a lot of interesting sort of lore with the 4 giants, and they sort of like created the 4 corners of Termina that you go to, and they wind up getting like sealed away, and they end up having to go to sleep or something like that. And so Skull Kid feels abandoned by them because he's like, well, hang on, like, you guys are my only friends, and now you're telling me you're going away, So it's all of those emotions for him kind of all percolating at once. And then it's like, cool. He suddenly comes into the power of Majora's Mask. It's like, of course he's going to burn it all to the ground.
Totally. There's a few things I do want to also touch on. Let's jump into that. So obviously at the end of the game, you play the ocarina, and the moon comes down, and you actually go inside the moon. And when you go inside, it's this beautiful green, verdant, just field that you walk through, and you could walk through there for hours if you wanted to. And you walk towards this final tree, and there's all the little the kill characters that are kind of bouncing around the tree. Each one has its own task to do. And if you have enough masks, you can give them the masks, etc. And you get, of course, the OP Fierce Deity mask, which basically makes the entire ending a complete cakewalk. But what do you think that space is? I know there's got to be fan theories on this.
Yeah.
I cannot think of something. I've thought about this. Like, what is this space? What is this representing? Why is this physically here? Is it a representation for Link to experience? Is it his perspective? Is it actually a physical, just beautiful paradise? Has the moon gone through different civilizations and sucked up the good stuff? And now I don't know. So I was curious kind of what your take on that would be.
My take on this has been I sort of feel like Majora's Mask and the moon itself. The moon itself represents death, right? Like that entire thing is death. Not only that it's going to crash into the world, destroy Termina, blah blah blah, and kill everybody there, but the moon itself is the manifestation of death that Majora's Mask made real. And so in some ways, I think that inside the moon is almost like a look at a past, at an afterlife, whatever. But what it clearly is a little bit of a window into the soul of Skull Kid. And you see these children that are all wearing the masks from the various bosses that I think probably represent in some way the four giants that are all playing. They're playing hide and seek and like running around the tree. And then you see Skull Kid sitting up against that tree, lonely by himself, you know?
Right.
And it's very quiet, very kind of like solitary. And like you said, verdant, open field. It's gorgeous. And it's just this kind of like quiet moment of like acceptance and loneliness. And almost like the read that I always had on it was, this is the crystallized feeling within Skull Kid that Majora's Mask used to create Death Incarnate, essentially. Like, this is what Majora's Mask, this moment, this feeling within Skull Kid's soul is what it latched onto in order to create this moon, this symbol of death. And it almost says these emotions in a kid, right? And these moments in our lives that deeply wound us can have that sort of power. You can have this giant world-ending moon, but in the heart of it, what actually created that moon? Just being lonely, you know?
And I think I love that idea of this being a representation of who Skull Kid, either soul or just who he is or what he wants, right? Maybe this is just his desires. It's his desire is to have this field where he can play and be around people, even if he is in that kind of a lonely state, he is around people in this kind of beautiful open area. I think that's a really interesting concept. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it also matches with the themes of the game pretty well, because when you actually go to take on Majora, you know, the heart and soul of everything that's happening here, of the actual, again, antagonist, it's almost like you're rooting out, you're actually flushing out this evil, like you're flushing it out, and what's left is Skull Kid, you know, bewildered, looking around like, what did I just do? Almost unaware, like, what did I just do?
Right. And it's also like at a certain point, Majora's Mask doesn't need Skull Kid anymore. Right. Like at a certain point, Skull Kid is ultimately just a vessel for Majora's Mask. And so when you're going inside the moon, you're almost like getting a window into what that character is at the heart of that character. Where if you have viewed Skull Kid this entire time as this antagonistic force, then this gives you a window into what that character actually is. He's actually just a scared and lonely kid sitting by himself under a tree while his four friends are playing without him. And that's how he feels. Even if that's not what happened in real life, that's what's real to him, you know? And that feeling was powerful enough to create all of this evil stuff that has happened on the outside world.
Yeah.
And I really love that. And I love too that, you know, the game rewards you for your hard work and the determination of, you know, of going through everything and for helping all of these people and putting everything aside to make sure that you help all of these people in their individual scenarios with the Fierce Deity Mask, which, as you said, makes the final encounter of the game completely trivial, which it's just like mash B to win, basically.
It really is. It was almost a disappointment where I'm like, I want to do this again, actually try to fight this thing and take it on. Because again, you put that thing on and it's basically almost like it's a button pushing, you know, exercise. So,
right. And that's the moment, like that's the true, I guess, like power fantasy that exists in Majora's Mask, where like in Ocarina of Time, it becomes this like huge moment when you become like an adult in Ocarina of Time and stuff like this. And in Majora's Mask, it doesn't really happen until you get the Fierce Deity Mask. and you just start to wail on this thing, which is, you know, to me, like the combat of that moment. And I have seen people, you know, say that they're disappointed by that sort of payoff. Like, oh man, I put in all this work and I don't even get like a, you know, a big satisfying boss fight. But to me, it's like the strength that you're given in that moment of, you know, that representation of all of these moments. Like everybody that you helped along the way has their own version of Inside the Moon, you know?
Sure.
They all have these struggles that all took place. This is the only time you get to actually go there was with Skull Kid, but all of them had these internal struggles, and you saw the end result of all of those, and you helped every single person to get there. And that is when you're rewarded with Fierce Deity, and that power is what is able to just systematically and handily overtake Majora's Mask.
That's a fascinating thing. You're 100% right. It's everyone combined. It's everyone unified. It's almost kind of like the end of Earthbound.
Absolutely. I love that.
It has a very similar feel where the only thing you can do is call on the people that you've met along the way. All you can do is pray. And which again, I love Earthbound. I would like to do. I should probably do an episode just on Earthbound. See, I can't talk to people because I do want to do just an episode on it because it's a game I love and loathe at the same time. I have a very mixed feeling about it, but I think it is a singular achievement, honestly. But boy, oh boy, isn't that not that fun to play? But anyway, that's for another day. But I definitely shades of that. And I won't say I was disappointed. Again, it is fun to just wail away on things. And I wasn't there for that. You know, at that point, I was very happy to kind of not just get through it, but just experience this completely overpowered scenario. It was just more of a combat thing because I could always go back, open the save, and not use that mask, right? And just, you know, not give those things up or just go right to Skull Kid, you know, sitting there. I also love, and I love when games do this, and I wish even modern day we did this more, where you get the little codas for every single thing. Not every little thing you do gets represented in the ending, but you get to see these little like you see all your friends again, like Final Fantasy VI. We were talking about it before. Yeah. You get to see the fruits of your success, right? And just little snippets and stuff like that. Again, really ties it all together. It's an extremely satisfying conclusion. I mean, extremely satisfying.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. And like I love that kind of final note that the game leaves you on with the Happy Mask Salesman, how he's just sort of like, you know, whether it be for a long time or for a short while, like we'll reconnect. You know, it's that sort of vibe of like the entire game structurally with these characters has been about, you know, the abandonment and lonely feeling, but then reconnection and learning what the connection and the tether to other people means to you. You know, that is an extraordinarily human thing. We can't go through this life alone. We can't go through this life without our own link coming in and helping us, you know, with something.
And us doing the same for someone else.
Absolutely.
That's just how, I do think that, I think it wraps up so beautifully and satisfyingly. And I love to see the fruits of the labor. I in the course of this, I was talking to somebody. I hope I've done a lot of interviews, so I apologize if I'm misappropriating somebody else, your thing to somebody else. I was talking with somebody who said whenever they finish Majora's Mask, they cannot take on the final form or the final boss without setting things right in the other 4 temples. He has to go through and defeat all the other 4 bosses first. So clean up the swamp, get rid of the snow. He feels like it's not a complete win for him emotionally. He's like, I can't do it. I can't leave these boxes unchecked and just go right to the end of this, which I find really interesting. And I think it says a lot about him actually as a person, but also the idea of you got to kind of have to pick your spot because again, unlike other games where you had this linear progression, I've done all the good things, it's time for the really good thing. As we've discussed, you have to kind of trade off and say, am I going to do the really good thing and leave everything else behind? Is the poor bomb lady, is she going to get mugged again? Because I'm not thinking about the bomb lady now. I got this moon coming down, but she's still going to get mugged. And my buddy with the chickens, he's still going to, his chickens are not going to, well, now maybe because you saved the world, but you know, his chickens, I guess he'll have a chance to, but you know what I mean? Like all those little stories, you know, maybe
and Anjou and Cafe,
maybe they don't
like
get together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like the daughter who won't reunite with her father, you know, the Cremia is going to get lobotomized. You know what I mean? Like that stuff looms heavy on you. And I think that's like part and parcel of it. And I think it says a lot that that person feels that sort of onus to go back and do all of that, to kind of have the world in that state. I think it's a really kind of beautiful side effect of a simple design decision. You know, that's like what I love so much about this game. And like, don't get me wrong, there are a lot, I love this is my favorite video game franchise. And I love so many of these games, but like none of them before or since have taken this very simple concept, this just elegant little concept, and just like captured all of those feelings and have created this sort of canvas for all of us as people to put our own thoughts and feelings and humanity upon. There's a reason that this is the one that requires 2 episodes of A Gamer Looks at 40. You know,
I mean, it's true. It is absolutely true. I mean, this is the one I wanted to kind of put that coda on because I think it deserves it. And I think I love that. I mean, this is shot up to like top 3. And you know, if you had told me 7 months ago, hey, where is this rank? I'm like, I don't know. I played it for a while and I just didn't dig it. Now, after really letting it marinate and soak in and really just diving in for a few weeks, boy, oh boy, it's just a rich experience. I wanted to do one kind of silly, quick thing.
Sure.
Not a couple of silly, quick things, I guess. But first thing, though, at the end of the game, of course, you have to surrender your masks to the different children as you do these like mini stages. And by the way, let me just publicly state here, maybe it's because I'm playing on a Steam Deck, not on an original hardware. Rolling around as the Goron is annoying. It was maddening what the game was asking you to do in some of those challenges. I don't know. Maybe it was just me playing it again on a Steam Deck, but I cannot imagine doing that on a Switch, by the way. I'm sorry. No, it's just not the Switch controller. I'm sorry.
You got to use that N64 controller.
I guess that's what it was. I mean, it could have been too sensitive. You know how emulation is. Whatever. Imperfect scenario. But you have to give up masks. What was the last mask you surrendered? Oh
my gosh. I've played through it several times now. So I'm not 100% sure. I definitely, I don't know that I like felt a strong attachment to, I guess the reason I don't remember is I don't know that I felt a strong attachment to the masks that I was giving up as much as like I guess the moments that they represented, like when you know, speaking of like Cremia and like having that, you know, you get these masks that kind of represent these moments that are like seared into your brain and onto your heart. You know, even like something as silly as like the little cow like milk bar mask, you know, like these things are important, you know, by the end of it. I remember the mask of that weird like spirit guy with his weird dance, and like the mask like makes
Kamaro.
Your face like Kamaro, that's it. Yeah.
His little head comes out of your forehead. That's the mask. That's one of my favorites. I love that thing, and you use it once. And a lot of these masks, by the way, are unitaskers. Like you really only use them once.
Absolutely,
and you're basically done. But it doesn't matter. There's still a fun collection. Yeah, like that. You know, for me, it was the bunny hood. I could not get rid of the bunny hood. I'm like, please don't make me get rid of the bunny hood. It's so useful in a game that requires you to go fast and beat the clock.
Absolutely,
the thing that makes you faster to beat the clock is just so important. But
and I love too that they make you give those memories away, right? Like that these things that are trinkets. I mean, like how cool would it be if we had these kind of like, you know, to quote Inside Out, those core memories, you know, of our lives. if those could be represented by physical trinkets and masks that we carry around with us, like the Happy Mask Salesman, and we had this moment kind of at the end of it where we have to give those up. I mean, how powerful is that? You know, I like to think of that symbolically, but I think that for me, and maybe this just speaks to something about me as a person, is like I treasure the memories themselves more than I guess the impact they had at the moment. So I didn't have like any sort of, I didn't feel like a weight to giving those memories away because I knew that I wasn't really giving them away. You know?
True. It was more the representation. And for me, it's funny because, and I guess this is just kind of where I was at with the game. Again, I'm trying to soak in the emotion of it, and I'm trying to really kind of recollect on the experience. But I was also thinking utility, because when I was going through my guide, I was being very careful to only get the bare minimum information I needed to move forward. And I wasn't sure, what do I need? Do I need one of these things for the last encounter? Do I need my bunny hood? Like I know the postman's hat is not that important. I know the all-night mask. I just needed once to stay up all night to hear a grandmother go on and on and on about stories, which again, so funny and cute. And not to jump all over the place, boy, the postman story is so cool. I like the postman a lot.
I love it so much.
I love that so much. You mentioned it, I think, in our first conversation, and it didn't really strike me until it happened. And that idea of him, it was like writing himself his final letter is so powerful. It's so powerful. If you could warn yourself, to tell yourself, just, it's okay, you know? And I guess got to shiver. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's something I relate to now, like in my own life, of just like when you get so caught up in your work and like you have this like self-awareness, you can't make yourself step away from the work. You have this obsessive, like workaholic nature. And this guy has taken it to the extreme where literally death is facing him down and he has to literally deliver a letter to himself just saying, hey, like, please, like, leave, stop working and leave, please. Yeah. I'm begging you, you know? And it's like this.
Yeah. And and the opportunity to free him of that, like to like let it go. And he leaves. It's so, I mean, it's really, really stunning and beautiful. The Postman I thought was a really very, very cool. I also think the game has, I love the scary moments. I think that the Gibdos, is that right? The mummified characters. That whole scene, and that one scene where it's the little girl in the house, and I think you mentioned her already, with the father, who he jumps out from behind a cupboard. I yelped. I yelped when that guy jumps out from behind a very well-timed jump scare. And I'm trying to remember what the story was, but I remember being really touched by I believe it is, and I'm just kind of stumbling through it. The daughter's used to this happening. Remind me of what that whole story is, because I feel like I'm just going to stumble through it. But I remember it being really touching.
I think that she is at least aware of it. And I think that there's, if I remember correctly, I think that he has effectively like locked himself away to like avoid hurting her or whatever the case may be. And it's sort of like I don't know if it's like only on certain nights of the year. I don't know if it's, maybe it's related to like the Carnival of Time or something like that. I don't know, but he has like some sort of curse that turns him into effectively like some kind of weird zombie. And it could also be because they're there in a kind of canyon, I think, which is kind of like the ghost like area, like the spooky, you know, kind of, it's a war-torn area that's like soaked in the blood of soldiers, you know, and I think maybe some of that, like proximity to that maybe has something to do with it. But whatever the case may be, like, whenever you sort of heal that person and they're like, she just embraces him, you know?
Yeah, it's so sad. And I am reading up on it a little bit as you're talking. She shoves her dad into the closet to keep him away from the Gibdos because he's slowly turning into one.
That's what it is.
Yeah. That's what it is. Believing that she's one of them, and then she keeps the door locked, and that's why you can't get in. You have to actually sneak your way in, to the house. She doesn't let you in. She chases you away, because she doesn't want her father to get stolen away. And when you release them from that, with again, I think it's the Song of Healing that releases them, which and all those little short stories of the Song of Healing. I mean, I don't know. It was, again, I could go all over the place with this. I don't have a big outline. I'm just kind of feeling my way through this conversation. But again, that Song of Healing, literally repairing this relationship and bringing them together. That was another really gut punch moment. Beautiful. Yeah. When you release the King of the Gorons, right, and you play that you play that Song of Healing, and you see him in front of his people, like you're giving him that moment.
I love that. I love to, like, the main sort of masks of the game, such as they are, like the Goron mask, the Deku mask, the Zora mask, like these masks are about people who have died, right? And like even the Zora, the guitarist Mikau, like he dies in Link's arms effectively.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and these are all characters, and like you learn about these characters posthumously. You learn about them from other people. And with Mikau specifically, like, I love this notion of like his music sort of being his legacy and carrying it on, and getting to, you know, the rest of the Indigogos, like getting his music to them, and kind of like one final song that they're kind of able to play in the finale, and like this notion of like his memory living on through his music. And gosh, I just find that so beautiful, how all of these characters live on in some way or another through other people. The Deku Scrub, you know, the game never comes out and overtly says it, but it's pretty clear that the Deku Scrub is that mask comes from the dead son of the Deku Butler at the beginning of the game. And there's a shot there where he's just crying over his son's body effectively. All right. And the game never stops and says, hey, this is what happened. We just have to intuit it. But like, like all of these characters are sort of living on through other people. And I find that beautiful. Yeah.
No, there's so much wrapped up into it. It's funny you mentioned the Deku Scrub and that moment, because in going through, you know, doing a little research for our conversation, lots of fan theories wrapped up in this game. And Zelda, of course, as a series, the twisted lore of it invites a lot of this stuff, which is good and kind of fun for fan theories. I want to run a few fan theories I uncovered and see what you think about them.
Okay.
One of them was about the Deku Butler and his Deku Scrub form, and how it reminds him of his son, that he's dear to statue the player sees in the beginning. Again, like you were saying, could be symbolizing that this is like him over his dead son.
Yeah.
But one fan theory here that's listed is that Link is actually dead through the whole game.
Ah, yes. A common theory. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think about this? And I'll read what it says here, and I'm going to get your take on it. It says, of course, this is based on certain details in the game, such as the fact that Link falls super far down at the beginning of the game. He could have died at this point, and the rest of the game is Link struggling to accept his death. And there's some other details that support it. At the Elegy of Emptiness that creates your statues, they all look like they resemble funeral memorials of some sort.
Right.
And in every section of the game, there is a death of some sort. What's your take on the actually dead theory?
Yeah, I've personally, I love overthinking about games like this. I love theory crafting. Like, that's a huge part of just me as a person. I love doing stuff like this. However, I've never really subscribed to that theory personally.
Yeah, I don't know if I do either, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, to me that removes like so much of the weight of it. Like to me, I like this notion of like stranger in a strange land, and even if if it's death, if it's not death, whatever, I think that like the important thing about it to me is like what happens in that space. And it almost goes back to the Link's Awakening thing, right? Where like the whole, I guess, twist at the end of Link's Awakening is that it all happens within the dream of the Windfish, and does that make the experience any less real or not? Right. And for me, like, I look at Majora's Mask and I'm like, well, if Link was dead the whole time, then so what? Like, right. To me, that doesn't like remove anything, but I also don't like when I think of Majora's Mask, I don't look at it as Link has been dead the entire time and goes to like Termina is like short for terminal or whatever.
Right.
And you know, it's funny because I'm blanking on his name, but the writer who is now like huge at Nintendo. Gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but he sort of explained later on that Termina was actually in reference to like terminals at a train station.
Oh, wow.
Which is like what he was thinking of when you know, naming Termina. It wasn't necessarily about, you know, terminal illness or death or whatever that a lot of people think it does.
Sure. That's interesting. Yeah.
But it's cool that it's open to so much interpretation. But yeah, I've never really personally jived with that interpretation of it. I will say, my friend Gabe Durham from Boss Fight Books wrote a really good book on Majora's Mask that gets into a lot of this stuff that anybody interested. I would recommend that from Boss Fight Books, the Majora's Mask book by Gabe. It's really good.
Awesome, man. Very cool. So rather than going through that then, because I had a funny feeling we would do this, that we would go on. I was thinking, we could do like a quick 25. We're at the minute 44, but
absolutely.
I mean, again, this is the topic. To wrap up Majora's Mask, and then I'd like to again talk about some other stuff, but to wrap up Majora's Mask, I guess what would kind of be a final thought as we've kind of talked through this and talked about the mask and the story and the ending and the theming and all the short stories. I guess what would be, I don't, for lack of a better term, like a parting thought about kind of what this game is about. You know, we all know obviously means so much to you personally, and that we've documented that, I think. And again, thank you for sharing that, right? Because a lot of the stuff that you've shared about this game is very personal, and I really appreciate it. So kind of what would be like a final thought for you on this game as we're kind of like looking at it in the rearview mirror?
Yeah, I'm not somebody, I love video games too much to like say definitively like stamped, this is my top 10 of all time. Like that changes every day for me. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
But I can say for sure that I have never had a more impactful experience with a game than Majora's Mask. Full stop. Like there's nothing else. There's not even a second place. Like I have never had the most like just intense human reaction to a video game that I had to Majora's Mask. And when I think of the power of the power that video games and that storytelling just in general has over me as a person, Majora's Mask is the ultimate representation of that idea. And it's also the ultimate representation of that idea through gameplay, which I think I think is why if somebody were to twist my arm and say, what's your favorite video game of all time? I think it's The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And like the fact that we have had this much to say about it, and not just you and I, but you and all of these other people can come at it with all of these different perspectives and viewpoints and theories, and the way that it passes through the lens of us as people is like what makes this such a special story. Like, I don't even know if the developers, when they were making this game inside of a year, intended on it to be the beautiful reflection of humanity that it is. But like,
I don't know. You're right.
It's just this gorgeous little crystalline. Like if we lived on Romani Ranch and the aliens were coming down to, make contact with us, kidnap us, whatever, if we made contact with aliens, there are a few like pieces of media that I would like to show them of just like, what is the human race? What does it mean to be human? And Majora's Mask is one of those. That's
cool. No, that's it, because it really does capture a length and breadth of emotions that are all very real feeling and very earned. And you make it a great point. I wonder if they even knew what they were doing. I mean, they knew what they were doing, obviously, but with that small time frame,
right?
Just to create something so sprawling on an emotional level is pretty special. Yeah, man. Thank you so much for checking out this edition of Gamer Looks at 40. If you haven't done so already, there is almost 6 months, nearly 20 episodes of Zelda, material out there on this podcast feed ready for you to enjoy. So pick a game. There's a lot of amazing stories out there that I hope you enjoy and appreciate. Thank you to Helena and Seth for taking the extra time to record this episode. Thanks to everybody who took their time for the Zelda experience, and thank you for your continued listenership. Until next time, continue being awesome.